took the better part of a decade, but finally, after 9 years of pumping cash into its loss-making 3G business, payoff, pay dirt for Hutchison. The biggest listed company of Hong Kong tycoon Li Ka-shing rode its way to an almost 50% jump in earnings.
Going into 2011,
we see that 3G will be a boost to our profitability. It will not be a drag to our profitability.
After pumping billions on billions into the business, Li Ka-shing is truly Superman, and the long investment journey has set him up for the future.
The companies themselves have the ability to switch from 3G to 4G. We have plans to change every minute. We are prepared.
And remember, Hutchison is sitting on a pile of cash after the recent listing of its port trust. So investors are looking out for more dividend payments, and Lee says he will line your pockets if profits keep ticking up. As Hutch entered a new chapter, James Sullivan, head of Asia Telco Research, JP Morgan, joins us on the show today. James, you know, the problem is for the better part of that decade, so much of what Lee does, you know, ports, retail, property, was ignored because of the overhang of 3G. It was just like a dark cloud which never, never left the valley. Has the veil been lifted? Can we cheer for Hutch in the future? Is the future bright?
I think there's two things to focus on at this juncture. First, we've seen a natural turnaround in profitability as the businesses hit scale and as they've gotten through a very heavy handset subsidization phase. And so even in 2009, you saw a very significant turnaround in the profitability of these companies across Europe. That continued into 2010, and on our forecast will continue into the years beyond. The largest concern from a forward-looking perspective is the fact that as data usage continues to ramp up and as high-speed data forms the crux of this business, there's some very serious spectrum concerns that need to be raised. I would argue that the European regulators are perhaps a step ahead of some of the regulators here in Asian markets, and that they've already realized this and have significant spectrum auction plans underway. So in the UK, for example, we expect an auction in 2012. The requirement for additional spectrum is critical, however, because if they're not capable of securing additional spectrum, they have to drastically increase the number of base stations that they're operating in each of the major cities in which they're offering services. That's an incredibly expensive proposition.
So in other words, you're saying that here we are at 3G. In fact, we're migrating to LTE, long-term evolution, and 4G. That basically the air is going to get more crowded. We're going to have more dropouts and defective service unless they commit to a whole new round of capital expenditure?
In Europe, I think it will occur slightly differently, again, because the spectrum is being made available. And so instead of traditional CapEx, you'll see potentially heavy expenditures on additional spectrum, which basically preclude the need for additional CapEx. In a lot of the Asian markets that we cover here, I think you will likely see heavy CapEx spends moving forward on the basis that you'll see significant proliferation of the number of base stations that operators are forced to run.
This next sideline issue is something that bugs you, bugs me, bugs everybody out there. One thing the world, the telecom world, has achieved is international connectivity. You can be connected through mobile internet around the world anywhere, but watch the clock. Or should I say watch your finger? Here's a question. Do you know how to tweak your settings so you don't bankrupt yourself? Okay, unless you know how to on and off your roaming setting, look out. Okay, folks, here's how I find it on my own tablet. You have to go manually into Wi-Fi and network settings, hit the mobile network setting option, and it asks you if you want to roam. That's the question popped up right there. See that? Allow data roaming. You may incur significant charges. Let's say you already have it set to yes and you forget about it. Beware, because that one touch of a button could cost you thousands of dollars in very, very shocking phone bills indeed.
Roaming is usually very expensive, both for data and voice, especially if you are traveling between the US and Hong Kong. $20,000 each month if you are doing several conference calls and downloading big emails.
It gets very expensive. I once sent a picture to my girlfriend from Australia and it cost me $12. So I don't use data roaming anymore when I go abroad to travel.
It's what you might call bill shock when you get your latest phone bill, and it's happened to most of us. A recent survey of 1,300 people around the world showed that 3/4 have suffered the disease. Today's modern smartphones and tablets have most of us finger loose and generous when spending on bandwidth. Consumers say they need email, location and mapping, and social networking, and it's a necessity around the world, but they're not willing to bleed money endlessly. Respondents say they're willing to forego data roaming services unless the companies slash their costs by between 60 and 80%. And they're getting backing from many consumer groups across the Eurozone and Australia. So until telecom firms bite the bullet, travelers are getting savvier at data savings. 2/3 of Asians surveyed say they use pay-as-you-go SIM cards to avoid exorbitant costs. In the United States and Europe, some 40% have done that, with more keen to try. So phone companies, listen up. If you don't want customers hanging up on you, then you hang up on those roaming fees. James, I don't get it. You know, I mean, they like you to use their service, and they want you to be able to use the service seamlessly with their roaming partners, that sort of thing. But the first thing I do at the Hong Kong airport is I switch off packet data and roaming, and then when I get to the hotel, wherever I'm going, whether it's personal or business, it's like, do you have free Wi-Fi hotspots in the room? Yay. No, in the lobby or the bar, at least. I mean, what does it cost these companies? Why are they charging us $5-6 US a minute on roaming? It's ridiculous.
They're certainly not basing the charges on the economics of what they're actually providing to you as a consumer. There are international data roaming fees that they have to pay to carriers overseas, but there's very high margins in this segment. One thing to think about, though, moving forward is we are starting to see wholesale adoptions of iPhones versus BlackBerries at several corporates, particularly here in Singapore. Standard Chartered is a good example. All of their employees were given iPhones, and the BlackBerries were taken back. As we start to step into very heavy corporate usage of iPhones for core business functionality, the operators will have to figure this out and start to offer at least, if not regional, if not global roaming programs at reasonable expenses to the corporate users that will really push this issue going forward.
Is the issue because maybe we're behind in terms of competition? You know, I mean, you look at Singapore Telecom on Hong Kong, or, you know, PCCW, it wasn't that long ago, you know, it was just a decade or so ago that there were monopolies. I mean, things have changed in very rapid fire succession. Is it the legacy of that, you know, monopolistic behavior or oligopolistic behavior which leads to, you know, price gouging?
I think it's a combination of two factors. One, as you very correctly state, the business model has proceeded far faster than a lot of people thought even just a few years ago. I think it's also a recognition of another core issue that we're studying within the telecom industry, which is a lot of the traditional lines of business are seeing very significant compression of margins, particularly in the wireless data space. And so the operators, as a result, are trying to make money any way they can, similar to some of the overage charges that we see with regional airlines. Again, over time, I think this will be pushed primarily by corporate users into more regional and global data plans that are more accessible to everyday people.
Yeah, you know, mobile and Wi-Fi are still yards apart in terms of bandwidth. I believe my 3G connects at about 3.6, whereas I get an effective 55 or 60 megabits per second on a home, you know, on a wired on a wired broadband. And I'm wondering, do you think 4G LTE is going to close the gap?
It'll close the gap incrementally, but I think there's two key issues to think about. One, operators worldwide have already recognized the fact that critical to the economics of their business is what most people are calling a Wi-Fi offload strategy, which is the ability to take wireless traffic off of the traditional wireless networks as fast as possible and onto Wi-Fi, which is a fixed line extension effectively.
All right. Hey, James, thanks for the time on Straight Talk today, okay? Catch up. James Sullivan joining us on the show. All right.